we're going to continue production of Crystals of Mabar, the 8th level adventure set in Eberron, cartography. Give me a second here to check my signal, make sure everything is coming through okay. Yeah, sure sounds good. Hey, if you follow me on Twitter, I've just posted that I'm live on Twitter, so if you want to find out when I'm live in the future, follow me on Twitter at Phil Kearney. I'm going to take another few moments here just to kick out some signals across the Discords and just say, hey, my name's Phil. I build adventures and DM-facing as well as player-facing content on the DMsGuild. There's actually a link down below that'll take you to a stack of books that I've already produced that are on the DMsGuild, and you can read all of them cover to cover. Decide if there's something that's important to you. If you find yourself ever going back to them to look at them for ideas or something you want to pursue, that's probably when you want to purchase them, because I got you. So I'm hoping to grab you again now that I've got my signals up and running. This is the book cover that we created. We're at episode 86 right now, and I think this book cover got created around I want to say around episode 40. So you can check the Eberron playlist to see that process. But as we have been working on for the past 2 weeks now, the cemetery map, we're absolutely crushing it, but boy, it's crushing us. It is a big chunk of land that it's a 52 by 54 inch map space that will fit Hoodandy on a virtual tabletop. And here's the black and white version that you can chop up into convenient 11 by 17 pages to feed through your printer for very low printer ink demand, for you to just have represented on your flesh space tabletop if you are a flesh space player. I'm a Roll20 VTT guy, so the color map is going to work just fine for my table, but you might be a hybrid yourself. Just watch out for those magic missile effects. We were talking yesterday about these puddles being having too much water in them for it to become more difficult. Once you start covering more than a 5-foot space with water, it becomes iffy about how deep is that water actually. And out here in these pits of grime, that's great. That's what we want. We want people afraid to step into that shit. More importantly, we want monsters to pull people into it so it gets gross quick. But when it's a smaller space, we don't want people arguing about, if I step over there, I'm going to fall on forever. It's like, well, we now have tiles that are allowing us. Hold on. Apparently, I have to restart the program. I think the new OBS software is starting to get chunky. I think OBS and Adobe have it in cahoots together to make their software crash at the same time, to encourage you to update their, whatever their update is for, justify their measly existences, I suppose. Who knows? I just know I liked technology when there weren't constant updates. I know why you're updating this. I know why this change is happening. I think this change is good. I approve. That is how I would like the world to work. Boy, am I not in charge. So I'm gonna do all I can do, and that is push pixels. So we know we have a a clockwise rotation that we want to maintain throughout the piece that we've talked about for a few sessions now. I got some physics going on here that just aren't jiving the same way. So like this coming out of here, I got to get on point with how I have stuff streaming into this space from these inlets. So it actually makes a lot of sense to have far less of that black border over here, to have this stuff all flowing down, and then to have, figure it out like that. I did an experiment with this here. I'm pretty happy with how these gradients, and I added more gradients while we were away yesterday. So I'm fairly happy with how this space sits. This feels a lot. That's what we're working on. This feels a lot more cacophonous. I'm actually still very happy with that. I like this the most, and I love this. So I'm wondering what's happening in this process that's taking me away from this eldritch creepiness that like thin fingers, and I'm moving. It feels like it's moving more in like this acid drop sort of. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. You're locked up again? Jeez, OBS, leave me alone. Obviously, it's coffee time. And coffee time means alarm time. And I haven't set my alarm, so has to be due. I love my associations. You build patterns and associations between things. Coffee for timer for coffee, 20-minute block of time. If I take a sip of coffee, does that mean that I have a timer going? If the answer equals no, then get after it. I'm gonna like my own content here real quick before we dive back into the piece. There we are. We're back at the piece. So yeah, we've got. I like how things are broken up here and here. I like how the graves all look. They're all done at this point as well. It's just these larger pieces that we're figuring out, and I'm being very sensitive about the look of stuff. I want to continue to have that, if at all possible, that same language, to be able to make sure that each one of these puddles in the end is going to look the same, which is a problem you have on big projects because you continue to evolve how your workflow process works. And you can, as you find better efficiencies or different work, it starts to change, and you have to be really sensitive about that. Hey, what's up, Cody? How be you, dude? We're gonna be working on pushing puddles of goop around for a couple hours, so you're certainly welcome to settle in. You got any questions? Shout out, let me know. I'll end up rambling about something and stick around to see if I stick my foot in my mouth. Hey, I'm at 125 subscribers now, and that's good news because I am consistently growing. Honestly, if you're new to the channel, anyone else out there, shout out. If you're new to the channel, I do this almost every day. It's either Eberron adventure map production like we're doing today. Yesterday, last night, I was doing Spelljammer ship token production with ships being scaled at the 50-foot square. So like a hammer ship was a 5x5 space that we occupied, and we were doing some edits there. I also do the Martial Powers project on Monday, which is my development stream where I go in and I start monkeying with text for a new book that we will be publishing. Hopefully that thing's going to go off to edits in February, like maybe at the end of February. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty stuff. It's actually really exciting. Doing good sounds like a grand time. I'm Cody from the Indestructible. Yeah. Right on, my dude. I'm connecting dots now. I think I'm probably like one of the only people out there that uses my actual name for like absolutely everything I do, but I don't know if that was a vanity thing or just for guaranteed clarity about like who I am. It's maybe I just haven't been a victim of identity theft enough. But yeah, man, what you got going on? I guess, I do this almost every day, so if folks that are new to the channel coming in from, like, say, the Eberron Discord or just catching me on Twitter from Eberron, help the cause. Like, subscribe, stick around, throw some sauce, and we'll build a game. This is, I had my second test DM, ran through this adventure last week, and she had been one of the first playtesters that we recruited in this adventure, and she ran through. It's got 3 acts, and she participated in all 3 acts. We broke it up into different chunks at different times, exploring different encounters and different scenarios and different goals that are presented throughout the adventure. And she was just a random pickup, but she liked it so much that she grabbed the playtest copy that we've been working with, the pre-edit version, and grabbed some of these maps that I've been building here on stream, and she ran it for her 7th level team last week, or rather over the course of 3 weeks. So maybe 15 hours of play. She cut out some stuff, but she was able to integrate it into all the plot lines of her Eberron adventure that were currently in motion, and it added a lot of fun, she says, to their campaign, and it gave a clear path forward for them to have new antagonists in the future, which is just a delight for a DM to hear, because that's why we build these things, to help deepen people's campaigns. But your Google account is the only one that isn't under code 3. I'm at work right now, so just listening to more or less working on my monk and mana spell tree. Nice, dude. Nice. I love the monk, man. It is such a I'm gonna be critical of wizards here for a second. I know it's in vogue, but I'm not taking shots at them because it's easy. It's just because they consistently frustrate me. It's like they have. I think they almost intentionally made the game difficult to connect the different pieces together, intentionally to avoid over optimization. They've already stated a rather distaste for multi-classing in general as something I guess they just kind of begrudgingly added because people love to multi-class, but it was not there. As I understand, it's not their jam. So the first time I ran a 5e campaign, I played single class, no feats, or rather that's the campaign I ran. I wanted to do a full 20 level run to see what the campaign, what the new edition actually feels like, as apparently it was intended to be played without any kind of house ruling or variant rules added in. So we did a straight run, level 1 to 20, all humans, just like completely bland, as white toast as we could possibly make the campaign. And if it played like a third, like a how to put, it's in some ways lower power, and that there's less resources available to, like, say, casters in 3rd edition. But the things that you can do, because it's generally a simpler mechanical system, offering less does more in 5e than previous editions. Like even just the inclusion of advantage is a mechanical. It's a very strong mechanic because it can encompass so many aspects of a narrative. Like you could have a massive barbarian type doing a 2-handed chop versus a rogue hiding in the shadow and sneak attacking, and they're both just advantage to attack. It's so you can cover a lot of narrative ground with very little mechanical information. That's one of the strengths of the 5e system in general. But its oversimplification also eats up a lot of the mechanical bandwidth of the game, that if you add other components to it, you're potentially overpowering the options that you're putting into that character or whatever it is that you're doing. So it's so just playing it like super bland vanilla white toast sort of campaign. I always recommend that in a system, to just so the DM can can touch grass on what does the developer consider ideal circumstances for playing this game. and then from there we've just added more and more mods and switched up how we play the game. Like the game I'm playing right now is a subclass Gestalt, so you only play one class, but you progress 3 subclasses at the same time. So like our rogue is an assassin, thief, arcane trickster, progressing all those at the same time. But like from like level 3, 4, 5, he got subclasses features, and then 7, 8, 9 he got subclass features, and then 12, 13, 14 he got subclass features, and now he's 17th level and he's starting to get subclass. Like at 19th level he'll get the arcane archer, the arcane trickster ability, for instance. So I can spread out the level distribution that you get in the subclasses, and the rogue of all of them need that the most, because their scaffold is so remote from other advancements. It's hard to feel that way, but that's like one of the variants that we came up with. So that makes sense that Hexblade didn't exist. Yeah. Hexblade, Hexblade out paladins the paladin. That's the problem with careless design in 5e. That mechanic, like I was saying, that mechanical space gets eaten so quickly with simple ideas that you have to kind of really pay attention to what are the new things that you're adding to the game, and what are the consequences of doing so. And you have to kind of play the game you have to design for the game that we have, not necessarily the game that we want. You have to do your own game if you want to start calling the shots on, well, I think Hexblade is stupid. That's why you come up with, variants and stuff, and which is why I hang out on the DMsGuild so much, because I get to use all their IPs, especially because I'm so in love with Eberron as just a default campaign setting. I want to keep I have my weekly table of like super committed players, and I love them to death. But that's a lunchtime stream, and the biggest challenge I'm having right now is justifying making more space for another campaign that I can. It'd be VTT. I really want to run a meat space game here in Seattle. But I just don't think it's realistic that I actually do that until I get some of these books finished and start opening up my plate a little bit more, for me to be able to indulge in a full 4-hour campaign every week, like at my house with like a lasagna in the oven and my gal snarking at people in the background, and us taking beer breaks and stuff. Like that's super fun, old school, beer and pretzels, playing with your friends D&D, and I value and miss that. Unfortunately, I'm super addicted to being an artist, and that sucks because artists, being a painter is a solo mission. It's me. I can't push pixels with friends unless they take a chunk of the map that I'm working on, which then plays into my leave it alone is my work, because you don't know what I'm envisioning issue. So art, a lot, especially visual art, a lot of it is a solo effort, which means that artists are eternally lonely. So it's I would love to get another game going. I would like to do a Ravnica game. Honestly, I can eventually justify running the Ravnica game, because I'll need to play test. I had this plan for 2025 to put out a hex crawl kit, specifically for Ravnica, because there's these rubble belts. It's a Opolis, anything. The Ravnica setting is a world that's completely covered with just one massive sprawling city, but that's like a general statement. In reality, the world has these 20-mile long worms, like 500 feet wide, 200 like 20-mile long worms that surface, destroy absolutely everything they crawl across, and then sink back into the earth. And they're called world worms, and they create these things called rubble belts, which are stretches of urban sprawl that are utterly destroyed by worm migration, and they can't stop it. They're too big. So the city is the world is in a constant state of being built and then being destroyed by these massive underground creatures. And so there's large swaths of rubble belt that take hundreds of years if there's no specific, like if it's a poor part of town, you know, if there's no specific valuable resources that the magocracy is competing over, those stretches of rubble belt can be left in neglect for hundreds of years. And that's where the Gruul clans come from. They occupy all this abandoned destruction and rebuild it as nature. And then eventually the guilds come back through and reclaim it and pick a fight with Gruul to own to take back what Gruul's been lovingly regenerating. So it's a fun ongoing quote unquote fun, as in like nightmarish for those people, but it's an ongoing process of building, repurposing, reclaiming, rebuilding, destroying, reclaiming, repurposing over and over again. And so the Rubble Belt area, the whole campaign theme there is you have to assess, is there anything in this stretch of Rubble Belt that was lost that actually needs to be reclaimed by your guild, whatever guild you're in. Like say you're playing Orzhov, then it's an issue of, well, we need to go excavate the tombs that were caved in during the last worm migration to see what tombs, what treasures, what relics may have been lost in that debris that needs to be reclaimed. By the way, there's Gruul clans that are going to fight you for being in their territory. And so that's your character, an Orzhov character, and then another character might be Izzet. And Izzet, the Izzet guild is in charge of infrastructure redesign anyway, so they need to send a surveyor in at some point. It's nice that you're volunteering to do it, by the way. If there's any interesting tech, or like we have a map here that says like point here, point here, point here. Inside this 200-mile stretch, there were 3 Izzet facilities that have been destroyed. See if there's anything salvageable from that, and if there is, you can fold that stuff into your own research. So you have, as a character, a strong motivation to go survey this area, because you're really just looking for abandoned tech that you can then lay claim to, because everyone there is dead. Because that's kind of how Izzet rolls. So so the Rubble Belt is a random generator of destroyed ruins in a 3-dimensional space, either tall buildings or deep delves into the Undercity, that you can set up these little regions of control. Like this area was Golgari, this area was Simic, but now that it's destroyed, it's been reclaimed by Gruul, or like this crate, like these neglected Krasis have gone rogue for themselves, and now they're a non-guild entity that has presence in the area. So you're flying into this area, and you're doing the surveying, and so it's a hex crawl of you finding mana and tech resources for you to accumulate, and you're either stranded there because your Ornithopter got wrecked by a stray Stinger missile coming off the back of Gruul enthusiast, or you specifically land there, you land in an intentional spot to begin the survey. Either way, you're done when you decide to leave. You accumulate as much resources as you want from the hexes to be able to, like, quote unquote, build your character empire or whatever it is there in the Rubble Belt. And when you want to cash in, you go back to your Thopter, and you go back and you report to base, and you either go back into the hex into the hex crawls for another resource grab and more surveying, or you're done and you move on to whatever else it is that you're doing in your campaign. So like you could start a hex crawl at first level, specifically so you can build renown with your guild, so that when you start at second level, you've got like 6 or 7 renown in your guild already, so you can have more guild resources provided to your character for your whatever your campaign was you wanted to do with your campaign. Or like say at level 9, if you get too much heat on you from fighting other guilds and you need to lay low for a while, doing a Robobelt survey, that'd be perfect right now. Let's just yeet out of town and go do the survey for a couple months until the heat lays off, and then we can go back in, and we have more resources now to deal with the problem that we were running across, or potentially pick up new allies or something. That's the thought process behind that Robobelt campaign toolkit. It's just a way. It's an opt-in or forced-in scenario that your characters either have to survive and escape or are willingly delving into to gather resources. And that's a fun way to reformat the Hex Crawl game campaign from like the BX, the Expert series, like level 4 to 9 in the original D&D. Hex crawling was kind of, you want to hex crawl so you can find the next dungeon, so you can delve into it to pull out new magic. That's kind of how the original D&D worked. And that's where I started. Old school back in 1987 was when I started playing D&D. So that was back in the after the first edition of AD&D had come out. I think it had published at that point, and my cousins bequeathed unto me the red box, a bunch of tournament modules, the advanced, the original AD&D Player's Handbook, and then since I was 12, my folks fleshed that out with like a couple, like the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as like the the original Unearthed Arcana had published at that point, and I fell in love with the game. So from then on, like all my lawnmower money went to buying books like the Wilderness Adventures Guide, or like Oriental Adventures, or Spelljammer when that came out, Al-Qadim, Dark Sun, all that stuff. Dragon Magazine, Dungeon Magazine. Like it was easy for my folks. They just get me a subscription to Dragon and Dungeon Magazine every year. Like Dragon for my birthday, Dungeon for Christmas. They get me a new subscription, and then I'd buy a book. Like there were $12 books back then, but the 125 pages between the hardbound covers, those were $12 back in those days. So I could pick up 3 or 4 books a month depending on how many weekends there were. So, but let's see. You've been playing D&D twice as long as I've been alive, roughly. I'm one of the COVID Critical Role Generation players. Hey, well, Matt, glad to have you, man. We have to feed the coffer. We need more souls in the guff. So we appreciate you taking an interest in this ancient hobby. But yeah, there's I mean, it's you don't know until you know, and you don't know until you live through it. So my cushion's screwed up. Hold on, let me fix my chair. Like if you don't know what am I trying to say? I think I've said it before. Oh, coffee time. I'm gonna put some more coffee in my mug, but I'm gonna keep rambling while I do it. The big difference in culture now, as opposed to anything else in our past, is the internet. That generations don't turn over anymore. The old guard is still here, and as older people fall off, and like people like me in my 40s become like older and older and older, we're not going anywhere. We don't become irrelevant anymore unless we choose to disengage with what's evolving on the internet currently. We stick around, and so there is no handoff to the next generation. The generation that should be handing off content to the new generation are still there and still feel young and still want to be relevant and want to be part of the conversation. and that's laughable in a lot of industries, like say fashion, but or like football and stuff, like sports, like you're going to have to hand off the game to younger players. You have to yield on the runway to younger models. The fashion will change, but people that have been buying clothes for decades recognize, like for instance, right now we're back in the 90s. There's ugly shoes. My gal is a fashion major, so she looks at the different trends, like trending, like what's the pipeline of producing clothes from ideation and runway into common purchase models that you'll see eventually at Ross or wherever, and so that's called what is it called, scheduling. It's I forget the technical term that they use, but there's a pipeline that's about 3 years long from ideation to setting up factories that can produce the textiles and the color palettes needed, that then go into the fabric factories to produce the clothing that ends up on the racks. It's a 3-year timeline to be able to line up the color coding, the textures, and the materials and the designs that you want. So anything that's hot and new right now has been planned to be hot and new now for years, literally for years, because there's so many people purchasing clothing, and the way that trends and what becomes popular to be able to make winners in the retail industry. Like we're going to be hot, like Calvin Klein is going to be a hot brand this year because they're on the inside track of what's being planned. And so the point of all that, when I remember what it was, give me a second here. You can see those trends repeating, like we're in the 90s again in fashion, apparently, she says. And she threw out a couple examples of different clothing types and stuff that I'm a guy, I don't pay nearly as much attention to as she would, obviously. But but if you're in your 20s in the 90s and you're pushing into your 50s now and you're seeing these things again, those 90s clothes don't look good on you because you're 50. So this fashion isn't meant for you right now. All the kids that this fashion is meant for never experienced it before. It's new to them. But the older people that saw this fashion come through before 30 years ago, they're like, yeah, here's how those palettes are limited. These types of shoes that they're pushing are actually super uncomfortable. I cannot wait for this cycle to be over, because this is a real shit industry era only reason we're really here is because it's cheap clothing, which is a problem that we're having with world resources right now and supply chains. It makes sense that they're pushing 90s trends right now because it's crap clothing and it's just built on cheapness. It was the quote. It's cheap clothing by design, which is perfect for where our economy is at right now, unfortunately. So you can sense right there's a lot of sculpting that's going on. And so what would normally happen is the sports team turns over, the fashion turns over, the older falls away as c'est la vie. It was my time in my day, and it's not anymore. So now I'm going to sit on the sidelines. And you even see that like with Twitch games, muscle Twitch games like League of Legends or Smite, where speed and reflexes can often be a competitive match against experience and savviness. Like at some point, just mechanical, just like with sport, just like with any other sport, youth eventually wins. All you need is just a smart a kid with fast reflexes and smart analytical skills to assess risks and to sense traps. He becomes the next excellent League of Legends player, for instance. But with D&D and role-playing games in general, the older I get, the more dangerous I become, because the physicality of the experience is virtual. There's nothing other than me being able to stay awake and have, not gain, not have too much insulin in my head to put holes in my brain. I'll be able to be an effective war chief for another 40 years. Give me another, I've already got 30 some odd years of experience. Give me another 40 years of game table experience, of running small teams through SWAT scenarios, of fighting all sorts of crazy magic monsters, and I will be a true terror. Like, I make jokes that I'm the librarian on the Terran's Discord, because the dreadnoughts from Warhammer 40k are two things. One, they look like tanks. They're literal mecha tanks on legs with cannons. But the things that pilot them are the floating remains of fallen Astarte soldiers that are potentially thousands of years old, that were so powerful and venerated and ancient in the wars that they participated in. They can't afford to let that knowledge go. So they encase it in a nearly indestructible war machine, so that when the thing is engaging in battle, it has literally thousands of years of experience of fighting orcs. It's like, hey, here comes some more orcs. Pop, 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 pop. That'll hit them in about 2 minutes. And then they walk away and go smoke a cigarette. And then 2 minutes later, boom, all the orcs are dead because they were completely right about their tactics. Like, you can't let that knowledge go. And the internet and the gaming sphere has done that. So the joke is that I'm the Discord dreadnought, because I've got 30 some odd years of personal history in this game development. So I've got a lot of opinions and perspective about things that work and don't work. And, you could use this mechanic if you want to, but back in 3rd edition, when they first came out with it, they ended up changing that in 5th edition, like spacing, for instance. They used to have a category called large, long versus just large. So, and that would look like, we've got a grid here. If you had a horse, of course, a horse in modern D&D, a 10-foot area. I'm going to actually switch this up real quick and take a tangent. Here's a 2x2 space at the 5-foot scale. That's 10-foot square. So like an ogre would fit inside this 10-foot square. He'd swing his club and he'd hit you and stuff. So, but if you were a horse or a centaur, for instance, you would fill a 2x5 space. So this is called long. This is called large, long. And so when you turned your horse, you're not occupying this space. And then your horse is here, and then your horse is here, or maybe your horse is here, depending on how you turn your mount. And while you're on this mount, your character is either here or here, up to you. And that created a lot of mapping issues, because sometimes, like if you're in a tunnel, like if you're in a dungeon map, and your map is like this, and you're proceeding on. If you are an ogre and you're occupying this 2x2 space, you know you're going to have difficulty navigating down this space. And 5e calls it squeezing. And in 3rd edition, if I recall correctly, you just couldn't traverse that space. But if you had a horse that had the long property, it could fit in this tunnel, but now you're hitting this corner, and that's goofball. But you could theoretically, you could have your horse navigate through like that. But that horse is gaining a lot of the same benefits as that ogre does, but it's navigating a different space. So when they rebuilt 3rd edition, the 3.5, they got rid of long, and they just made everything large in this 2x2 space. And they kept that from 3rd edition, 4th edition, now into 5th edition. They've maintained that technical information because it works. But you don't necessarily know that evolution unless you actually live through it to understand why that thing is. It's like now that we're looking, like, say at Spelljammer, for instance, you have a 150-foot long ship. And if this is a 50-foot square, your ship sits like this. But what if your ship turns? Now you're in these 3 spaces, and it makes spacing. It's the same problem that we had with horses and other creatures like Remoraz, for instance, back in 3.5, that people that are creating new, like, I want to make Spelljammer better, and they're using this same 3E floppy spacing mentality because they don't know, because they weren't around to see what kind of difficulties that creates with spacing and tiling things up on a map. They had to change that spacing. That was important to change that for consistency and to be able to properly target things and to not gain like that horse. It's easier for you to get that horse behind cover so that you can't hit it and it can protect itself against spell effects than that ogre can. So that's a super quick tangent, but people. The point of this all was initially is that with the internet now, older people, if it's like chess experts and people that play Go or backgammon online, or even Catan is another great example. They've been around, they played the game so much that when you're online, you could be running across an 80-year-old that's freaking been playing Go for 50 years. He is going to tear you apart. Good luck, unless you're a really smart young player. But the real advantage that role-playing games have is that all these people want all of us to become better tactical fighters, to become better teammates, to build better, more fun campaigns, to have better tools available to us. So Wizards can't hide behind the new generation being ignorant of the older IPs. We know how these games used to feel, which is why there's so much frustration with where 5e and Wizards' minimalist approach to campaign settings has been, because we spent hundreds of dollars on Planescape box sets in the past. Like I had like 4 box sets of Planescape stuff just covering the core, the lower planes, the upper planes, the inner planes, and then there was all the actual, like the Astral book, and then all the adventure stuff that went in on top of it, and then like new factions, and then there was the faction wars that scuttled everything in the middle of it. It was crazy. There was a shitload of content that a lot of us still remember. So we aren't going away. So we're making a better game space for everybody, quote unquote better game space. Hold on. I argue that in Ship Combat it's difficult because it's all a collection, as opposed to having to manage an army of centaurs. Well, if that sounds like you're talking about a fleet. It's different because it's all a collective. I see what you're saying. Gotcha, because there's multiple people on one ship. But still, if you look at the rules of Saltmarsh, it still has a 20-foot wide, 100-foot long boat, making a 90-degree turn once per round. The map is still super goofy. Like Trent Monk ran a battle, and the way that the ships were navigating in that space, it made it tactically awkward to use a weapon. Like a ballista at the front of the boat and the catapult at the back of the boat. The way he turned the boat 90 degrees made one weapon viable to attack with and the other one not viable to attack with. It's that's an interesting case, but I am particular about ship mechanics because of how I rebuilt Spelljammer in particular, which I actually, in the stream I had last night, in the Spelljammer playlist, me building ship tokens actually addressed that a bit. That's an interesting conversation. It's probably worth your time looking into if you care about like ships at all. But those variant rules only work well with Spelljammer because of how maneuverable those ships are and how fast they can move, and being in a 0G environment allows them to gyroscope around a lot, so you can get different types of angles and working on stuff. I thought it was interesting poetry that the 5e game system, the 5e Spelljammer as presented, leaned into that same flexibility of being able to freely maneuver like on a gyroscope, which is particularly relevant to the conversation at hand. But yeah, I see what you're saying about it's because they don't integrate moving ships as part of a character's normal action economy. Saltmarsh didn't have to worry about resolving complicated map mechanics with larger scale objects like vehicles. But that's my jam. But the point I was actually trying to make, hold on, let me make sure I'm caught up to speed. I guess it depends on how long a round is in ship combat. And the length of a round is going to depend on how much distance is being covered, and how much of that distance can the object or creatures involved move. Like, for example, a round is 6 seconds. If you want to have an army, like a battalion of say 100 troops occupying a 500-foot square space, and they can only move 30 feet in a round, having 500 feet worth of soldiers seems a little silly. So what you can do there, and this is something I cover in the, if you look at the In Command of Armies, Guilds, and Kingdoms playlist that I have, I think it's around episode 7 that we talk about it, that if you're upscaling the size of the battlefield, if you're on foot moving at 30 feet per round like a human would, then basically a 500-foot square is 100 times larger than the 5-foot square, so you can still have a round of combat. It's just each round of combat is 10 minutes long. And at the end of that, like if you're moving, it's 10 minutes because it takes for a character to, in a 500-foot square, to move 6 squares. That's 3,000 feet. And so for you to move a squad 3,000 feet in formation and still be able to attack, it's basically at the end of that 10-minute round, you have to move first to engage your enemy, and then once you are adjacent to your enemy at the 500-foot scale, you then zoom back in and you can make your attacks. And as long as neither unit moves, you can then continue combat at the 6-second round, because everyone at the 5-foot scale is properly engaged to be able to have battle. But if one unit disengages, they either do it at the beginning of their round and can't make any attacks because they're now moving into a 10-minute round to be able to move that 3,000 feet, or they attack first and then can move. And that attack happens in 6 seconds, but the movement then scales out to 10 minutes. So, and you can do that with any scale, up to 24 hours at the... what is it? At a 1 mile scale, you can have squares up to 1 mile for troops to be able to move inside of during the course of a 24-hour period of time. So that's the largest scale that a soldier on foot can have a square in a hex campaign and still be able to fight on a round-to-round basis. 1 mile, because of how much limit their movement is on foot. If you put them on a Spelljammer ship now, at 100 million miles per 24 hours, that scales down to 10,000 miles per round, or 1,000 miles per square. So that's the maximum scale that you can have in Spelljammer, is 1,000 miles per square. But if you're doing something like the Blood War, you could potentially scale that out to 10,000 or even 1,000,000 miles per square, depending on what the size of the conflict is. And since demons and angels are effectively immortal, you could potentially have a 10,000 year round at the 1,000,000 mile scale, and that sets the environment for your campaign, because your characters are only going to live for 100 years unless they become angels and demons themselves, which is a great campaign goal. And now you can conduct the Blood War at the 1,000,000 mile scale as an ongoing 4X campaign, where your character is commanding this faction of the Blood War against these other factions that are entering Avernus. And you could just run a 40, like a Warhammer 40k style Blood War at that huge scale, and just be processing through these massive armies that could be represented as 5-foot square. This square on my map, this represents 1,000,000 miles. So that means that we have roughly 100 million miles troops that are fighting, like 100 million dretches commanded by, broken into 10 battalions of 10 million each, which are each led by a pit fiend, for instance. Like, you can scale up battle that way. That was the In Command project that Ukulele Bard and I were working on, and we had gotten through all the command mechanics and had been playtesting vehicle mechanics in Descent into Avernus, using Infernal War Machines as small-scale units of 20 feet or smaller size squads of machinery. And then Spelljammer came out, and we realized we could extrapolate from there. We could extrapolate up to the 500-foot scale, because no Spelljammer ship was larger than 500 feet. So that became the default size for general distance combat in Spelljammer. And again, we cycled out that it's 10,000 mile, like 1,000 mile grid square was the maximum size of combat you could have, and these ships were fast enough to do that on a per round basis. So that then means that if you have two ships that are moving 1,000 miles, just a measly 1,000 miles per hour, because like like maybe you're fighting over a moon and you want to stay in orbit with it, well, you can't move more than 1,000 miles per hour. Otherwise, you automatically move out of orbit with whatever it is that we talk about all that in the book. Like how to maintain orbit, orbiting speeds, how to conduct battle in orbit versus free floating in space. How does this get affected by astral, where time is eternal, effectively? It's all about scaling time and distance, and how does your action economy fold into that representation of a round of combat. In Spelljammer, characters can still have 6-second rounds. It's just that 6 seconds is 1,000 miles. So now you have to start worrying about how far can I actually see something, and how fast, like if I'm going to go into an asteroid field where the average size of an asteroid is 50 feet or less, if I'm moving 10,000 miles per hour and I hit an asteroid, I am road pizza. So I have to slow my ship down enough to be able to engage with these objects, which is represented by the Spelljammer mechanics of slowing you down to 5 feet automatically anytime you encounter something that's large enough to take note of or could be dangerous to your ship. They oversimplified those mechanics by just automatically slowing you down to 5 feet. But that eliminates things like chases. The way that we rebuilt the mechanics for Spelljammer is now you can have a chase at 10,000 miles per round, and the scaling distance between the ship is just how close are you getting to synchronize with that ship as you're pod racing through asteroid fields. You're trying to maintain relative distance to that other ship so that you can fire cannons at them or jump across with a rope to then storm their deck and do all that cool pirate stuff that you want to do in Treasure Planet. Well, it's not so much this is a dungeon map for a ship. It's more of a matter of being able to figure out managing time and space at high velocities, which was the major project that we had, of figuring out those physics. And then how do you break those physics down into D25E combat mechanics, which we successfully did. But we started with that troop movement. Like if I'm going to move troops 1 mile, what's the duration of combat as a result of that, and how do you work in the action economy of troops attacking? So you have that scaling difference in 10-minute rounds versus 6-second rounds, depending on what actions it is that the characters take. And just to summarize that again, because we're going to be getting back to that book once Spelljammer is published. We're going to get back into that book, and we're going to be using Dragonlance, the War of Dragonlance, to prove as our proof of concept by translating all the battles in the Dragonlance book as well as the board game into these scaling 5e mechanics to demonstrate that it's actually very easy to have large-scale battles in the 5e mechanic system. You just have to know. You have to think about time and distance is the major factor there. We already cracked that code. So now you just have to backlog all the caveats about spellcasting and combat options like difficult terrain and cover and stuff like that. Like how does that get considered when your creature is an army of 10,000 soldiers that are stretching out over 1.5 miles, for instance. So, but that's game design. That's why we get paid the big bucks. But that's a super micro example of the larger conversation, which is the zeitgeist of role-playing games. It doesn't turn over. You can't recycle ideas the same way as you maybe used to be able to recycle things before the internet, because those people are still here. And we're all angry at how thin the Spelljammer content is compared to how rich and lush the lore was back in the TSR days. Now the argument is, well, TSR spread their eggs out across too many baskets, and it caused them to go bankrupt because of overmanagement of pipeline. But WOTC is $1 billion company. The idea that they can't invest in a stack of books, or at least progress the content online. See, this is where I actually favor online. They could have lore masters at Wizards of the Coast that are continuing to develop small areas and like geopolitics for micro areas outside of the Sword Coast and Forgotten Realms, to be able to build a large virtual world that's constantly being updated by people that all their job is to flesh out interesting optional ideas, because they're $1 billion company. They can afford to pay Ed Greenwood $100,000 a year to be that guy who's been there since the 80s, who has sage knowledge, who could be an active Ask the Sage. You're $1 billion company. You can afford to do that. And honestly, doing that kind of locks you in with the people that actually have money to buy your stupid visual effects and your animations. We're ridiculously rich in comparison to the 15, 16-year-old audience that isn't gonna buy anything, that relies on everything being. I had to spend all my money on books. It was either books or dates. So it's like, well, I guess I need to figure out how to have dates for cheap, you know. So, but it's such a big cultural difference that all these old people, instead of going away, they're telling the younger generation, like, here's how things used to be. This is what we expected to see, and we're going to keep bringing this stuff up because it's fascinating depth. Like, all that lore from second edition is super interesting, and just reading that stuff makes you want to run a campaign like, say, in Daggerfell, because there's a whole book about Daggerfell and how freaking cool everything there is, because they paid people to put text on page about how freaking cool Daggerfell is. So that's a huge cultural change that is adding pressure to the new generation. It's like, it's more and more difficult for younger generations to have their own identity, because the older guard isn't going away, and they're going to say that their reality, the old ways, are better. And that's not necessarily true, but there's a lot more invested into it back then, because you had to invest into it, because there wasn't a hive mind on the internet in the 80s where you could have people spouting out books worth of lore because they loved doing it. The only way you're ever going to see any lore about the Forgotten Realms is whatever it is that D&D publishes, because there was no common space for people to gather like the internet. If you wanted information about the Forgotten Realms, you need to buy this book, because it's the only location you're going to get that information for your campaign. And so publishing books and information was a monopoly. Now information is free. And so they have to redefine how we're going to gain profits. We can't do it by publishing information. That information becomes effectively free upon exit. Hence, we're seeing this big lockdown on IP content, because it's the only way they can get any money, because ideas don't get you money anymore. Which is why, in my case, I build these scaling army and vehicle systems, and people may or may not buy them, but the profit for me comes from being able to use them with adventures that Wizards of the Coast already published. Light of Xeraxis uses my Spelljammer mechanics, and I have a conversion for you, and I provide all the art assets and all these tokens for you to play a Light of Xeraxis campaign using my mechanics. My army mechanics, I'm going to convert all of Dragonlance for you, so you can play the Dragonlance campaign using my army mechanics. By the way, if you thought that was fun, we're converting Descent into Avernus using army and vehicle mechanics and the guild mechanics that we're developing. so that your characters can take command and run Elturel as a fortress of operations for your team to fight the Blood War as a third faction, which was Zariel's dream, which led her into Avernus in the first place and caused her to fall. So there's a lot of really cool narrative you can have inside of that as your characters become generals fighting against the demons. You now have to worry about, are you going to be corrupted by the battle itself, the fray, as it were? If you go into the fray, you risk losing pieces of your soul while you're doing battle, because you are taking upon yourself the aspect of hell, of Avernus, the battlefield. You are becoming the battlefield as you dominate and take command and destroy factions, enemy demon factions in the Blood War. You become those demons. Like, that's the risk to you as a character. So that's like a really fun dynamic of the campaign. But unless you have the ability to command armies into Avernus in the first place, you will never explore that as an option. So we're creating tools to make the adventures that people have bought to play them a different way. We're offering replayability for campaigns that are otherwise just sitting on your desk. And why would I want to bother with 5e anymore? It's like, well, you don't have to bother with buying any new adventures if you want to, but you bought all these other adventures already. We're now going to give you new tools to be able to play them again in a different way and expand your mind on having a larger scale of epic campaigns to then inspire you to go out of Avernus and redo Storm King. Now that we can have spell jamming ships, we can reformat how Storm King moves his Cloud City from location to location. You can speed up the hex crawl from being days to get to another city. You can get there in a matter of minutes. So if a specific city is being attacked by a dragon, you can fly your ship in and try to fight that dragon. Now you've got dragons fighting the Storm King's fortress. So now you need to start recruiting troops to man the stations on that fortress. So now you're doing a hex crawl with a fast vehicle that's a combat platform that your team can descend from to engage in dungeon delving. Or if a town is being attacked, you're constantly moving your transport from location to location to protect the cities from dragon fire while you're trying to achieve your own goals. That is a very different campaign, playing Storm King's Thunder, than what's presented, because Storm King's Thunder basically has you chasing your own tail the entire campaign, and it's very disempowering. So if we can build tools that allows you to take command of that situation for your characters to become the heroes that we think they're supposed to be, now you're thinking like first edition. So you need to have people that played first edition around to remind you how these campaigns actually operate. The Test of the Warlords was a 16th level Greyhawk adventure for first edition, where you're basically given a 20 mile hex to build a fortress on, and then to domesticate as many hexes around you as you can to expand this kingdom that the Emperor has bequeathed unto you, this title. And there's dragons, and there's like an elemental horde. There's a community of frost giants. There's a barbarian horde. There's all these large armies and epic scale enemies that are going to prevent you from peacefully building out your hex in your kingdom to achieve the goals that your emperor has set out upon you to domesticate and populate this area with new new settlers to expand his empire. First edition had mechanics to address these things. It's just they were clunky as shit, and they were difficult. Battle system was very difficult to use. 5e, using these mechanics, allows you to re-enter battle system and have this sort of a campaign idea. And I've already gotten approval from the DMsGuild for me to translate Test of the Warlords after we finish Dragonlance. So we can constantly go back to old content and reshuffle it into 5e. And with people like me and the old guard not going away, we remember how these things work. So we know that 5e can be more than it is. Which is why there's so much pushback and dissatisfaction from the old guard gamers that aren't going away. But we're also attempting to train the next generation on, you know, what can we do to push the needle on where current game mechanics are going, and the newer generation is providing us with information about what are they valuing in the story or the development of a campaign. And it used to be very little interest in personal character development, but the newer generations are very much more interested, like through Critical Role and whatnot, of having a satisfying story arc, not just random hex crawls and we're going to build that story given the information that's provided to us. There's more of an interest behind the DM has a plot that the characters are engaging with and traversing through as an experience. It's just you gotta find that fine point between this is an experience that you're presenting as a piece of performance art that is being performed by the DM to the players, and to then engage the players from being more passive in what that presentation is to being able to have meaningful choices that are going to drastically affect the next performance that the DM had planned for the campaign. Wizards of the Coast assumes that the players remain passive on these rails that lead them from one plot point to the next, that you get to fight stuff while you're on that rail changing scenes. It's almost like, let's distract you with a battle while the DM changes the scenery for the next act and present you the next story for you then to respond to and then fight whatever is your fight as you're transitioning to the next scene. It's a big culture shift, and there's a lot of friction between the old guard that are still here with how they think the game was supposed to be played in the past to how it's evolving into now. And savvy developers are trying to bridge that gap so they can create a satisfying experience for both generations. So they both want to remain engaged in the same space and become allies for each other. Instead of quartering themselves off in the first edition because it's what I like, third edition is because what they like, fifth edition is because it was what you like, and then seventh edition like in 10 years. We got to have a common ground for all these different guards, these different generations, to have a common space that they want to be able to work in and play together. And the OGL was supposed to be that common space, but it doesn't benefit the business to have the old guard telling the new guard that what's being put out right now is garbage and here's why. Like, getting rid of those people is actually valuable. I think a low-key benefit to Wizards to trash the OGL is to get the old longtooths off their yard and let them build flimsier content that newer players won't know the difference of. You guys can go play OGL, or you guys can go play OSR or whatever. We don't care about you anymore. Just get out of our playing yard. Get off our play. What am I trying to say? Get off the field is what I'm trying to say. But we don't have anywhere to go, and we don't want to. And we keep criticizing the people that put out content that, you know, this is thinner content than it used to be. So it's creating a social pressure. It's going to be interesting to see how that actually fleshes out. Sorry, this is me on super ramble mode, which if you've seen a number of my streams, you'll recognize me as ranting as an old man. But at least we're still pushing pixels. I'm not waving my hands around like a madman today, so it's productive time. But this would probably be a good point for me to drop in my plug. You know, like I said, this is the kind of stuff that I talk about. Anyone that's drifting in that maybe this got served up to you on YouTube, I stream almost every day. I build maps. I talk about days of old. I talk about plans for the future and how all these things can work together. My spicy opinions on the world as it is and the RPG environment. My takes on game mechanics, character ideas, campaign settings, all that crap. If you're new to the channel, please be welcome to subscribe. Drop me a comment. Join the conversation. Hey, Hornetico. It's good to see you, my dude. Yeah, water's coming along nicely, my man. We finished this up. We added more of those gradients, so I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Let's drop our gradient on top of it. And I fixed up these the cobblestone path. I added in additional stones in each of these areas so that it became more obvious that this is just something small and shallow that people can traverse through, while these larger pits again remain, well, it's up to the DM how deep they are. Honestly, they could lead you straight into hell if you chose. But yeah, we're working on. I kind of actually ended up. I find, ironically, as I start ranting heavier about a topic, the more I find myself moving into one of these little pools and spinning around, because mentally I'm kind of mashing on a point. So as I scale out in the conversation, I'm able to push myself back out into the page and working along the borders. Again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to clear the circumference of this area and then spiral our way in clockwise into the middle of the page, because that's how water moves, clockwise up in the northern hemisphere. So I'm trying to evolve the piece in that same clockwise rotation. But when I start ranting about a subject, I find myself pulling off into like a little eddy and working that eddy by pushing pixels while I'm talking. It's God, there's no depth to me at all. It's like what I am is what you see is what I am. It's a very, very shallow, broad personality. So that's I'm aware that I was in that eddy. I can now pull myself out of that little swirl back into the larger piece as a whole and keep moving across the surface of the map. But my goal, if I can keep my face on the screen, my goal is to have is to push into another puddle every day. And as the puddles, as these sinkholes get bigger and bigger and bigger, that's going to become more and more difficult to do. So I can at least try to complete a sweep of this thing with the... Jeez, we still have 40 minutes left. That's good. So I can hopefully get my way around the circumference of this map space before our 40 minutes is up and start delving into like this level. So by tomorrow, maybe tonight when I'm off camera, I can actually finish this puddle, and then we can start in on the next one, which will probably going to be this one's next, and then this one, yeah, and then this one, and then finishing with this one. So we're just working counterclockwise around the map, and then in the puddles we're working clockwise to work with how drainage works. But you can tell I got some decent sleep last night, and that I'm heavily caffeinated already because I am in mega rant mode right now. But I finished that Bombard token on the Spelljammer stream last night. I know that you were around for a little while, Hernetico. You had to crash, but you can go back and check that out because we finished that one up, and so we'll be. Next time we do Spelljammer, we'll be working on the Damselfly. I think I'm going to relegate Spelljammer to my Monday and Wednesday night streams for the time being. I should be able to complete 1 or 2 ships per session. And there's only like 16 ships plus the 4 fighter 5 1 2 3 the 6 fighter craft that I made to add on for the smaller scale Spelljammer ships. I should be able to complete those in a couple weeks. I'm going to have to set Eberron down for a minute and complete that asteroid map. Because once the tokens are finished and that asteroid map is finished, that's all the assets that I need for us to, well, there's individual character assets, but I won't bother working on those until we actually get into the Light of Zaraxis conversion. But once those maps and these ship tokens are completed, that's all the assets that we'll need for the zip file outside of the Zaraxis conversion. So we'll be able to safely transition, or smoothly rather, transition into, oops, I just locked up. I have to save the document and reopen it. At that point, we'll be able to move into, the text will be done. Like, the editing should be done for the Spelljammer adventure probably in the next 2 weeks or so. And it's probably going to be another month or so for the Eberron manuscript to be completed, because Stuart's an excellent lore master of Eberron, and he keeps finding little tidbits that he is apparently enjoying adding into the context of the adventure. Like just last night, he created like a background story of we had a very cursory surface level idea about like who the dead are that were in the cemetery, but he's gone through and he's like, actually we could do something with this, and he fleshed out a little background for all the dead that were in the cemetery as an elite Carnathi squadron that had fallen 500 years ago, defending Carnathi from an undead invasion. So they were honored with this cemetery as basically a monument to their sacrifice, and they then locked down this manifest zone to prevent it from potentially destroying Carnath in the future. And then it started being exploited as a resource, and now they've taken that exploit too far, and it's starting to cause trouble. It's like, oh my god, what a great story to fold into this as just expansion of the idea, and it's perfect. But that's the kind of shit that we get for having recruited Stuart. It's a much cooler campaign as a result of it. And if it's going to take him a number of added weeks for him to, add his 2 cents, then God bless you, Stuart, because that's just making this campaign just that much fucking cooler. It's like, well, now I kind of want to run that squadron, using combat, mass combat rules to fight the horde of hell that's coming out of this manifest zone. Like, I kind of want to play those guys. And I know they're all going to die, and they're going to end up in the cemetery someday, but that's a battle I kind of want to run. It's a fun little one-shot. So, like, after running this adventure, you could offer that one-shot. It's like, hey, all those guys that were in that cemetery that rose up and attacked you, if you want to do a one-shot, you can run that army against the initial opening of this manifest zone. That might actually be something somebody would be interested in doing. Like, that'd be a fun little expansion piece that would tie this adventure to the mass combat system that we developed. But this is all kind of relying on me staying on the DMs Guild, and 6-9 months from now, that might not, Wizards might not be interested in having me here, which would be a real shame, because all of these IPs are so fun. Like, Eberron is a captured IP of Wizards, and they're like, if they ever shut down the DMs Guild, what am I supposed to, what am I going to do? Put this stuff up on my Patreon? Invest 300 hours of production and put it on Patreon for people to look at it on Reddit and then snark at me about it? I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know where the future's going. It'll be interesting to see. But I think I'm honestly amazed. I love Eberron as much as I do. And I want to get that deep into Ravnica. And it's like, that's a captured Wizards of the Coast IP. It's like, I don't want you guys making it difficult for me to be able to create things for your half-assed efforts. Like, I want to build this stuff out. I love these things. Like, these campaign settings, I am in love with them. I am a Wizards fanboy. And I hate how difficult it is they're making it right now for me to love their work. So I don't know what their plans are. There is ridiculous talent on the DMs Guild, like people like me that are better designers, that have better that are just legitimately better. Like, I am a mid-tier designer, compared to the people on DMsGuild. Like, that is some serious talent that Wizards are fucking stupid for having ignored. Like, it's insane. I am hoping that this whole D&D Beyond thing invites us into that space and allows us to only give up 20% of our money, that we can do away. I love you, One Bookshelf, but if I can do this same work and keep 70-80% of my profits by being on D&D Beyond, I will take that deal. I am already operating under the license that 1.2 is offering, that I don't own any of this stuff, but I get paid for producing it as long as it stays in the good graces of Wizards. If they're willing to, and I have to give up 50% right now because Wizards takes 20% and One Bookshelf takes 30%, and I'm left with 50%. If Wizards builds a game space where I can keep 80% of my money and still produce these things, and still be able to have my virtual tabletop like this and not have to worry about their stupid animations and stuff, fuck yeah, man, give me that. I want that. Sorry to the larger community and stuff, but I would love to keep half of my money for building an alternate Descent into Avernus campaign setting. Like, give me that all day. Hurry up. Make that deal for us. I'm hoping that's where this ends up going. I mean, it's Jack and the OBS crew. I'm sure they'll be fine with Orc coming out and stuff. And if I eventually want to leave Wizards of the Coast and build my own RPG, obviously I'll have a lot of experience at this point doing that. But I've got so much I want to do with the campaign settings that Wizards already produced. So I just want to stay in this space, honestly. It's not very popular right now. But that's, I mean, my personal opinion is I want to see more creative stuff. I want the OGL to be open. I want all these businesses to prosper because I'm competing against them. And I'm not going to end up being a better designer because I shut down Benjamin Hoffman. You know, if Cobalt Press goes away, that's not going to make me a better designer. It just means there's less people in the space to compete. And that's a very corporate mentality. We don't want competitions because you're lazy. But that's how corporations work. They are mandated to produce the most profit with the least amount of effort. And if they can shut you down and capture more market value, they're technically doing their job. And they're doing it well. So, God, I hate corporations. I hate the stock market so much. It's such bullshit. But it's a good way to gather resources to expand your base, to be able to have more, have more capital to produce things. But if you're not going to produce cool things, why bother? Like, give me $1 million and look what I will be able to do for you. As opposed to what Wizards and Hasbro does with $1 million right now. It's secure their IP and prevent new things from being built. It's a creator versus profiteer mentality, and it's a shame those two things don't coincide more often. But I really don't want to get into another disappointed with OGL rant. It's just so easy to fall into that rant because it's such a baseline behind everything that we build. It's like this underlying current. It used to be that we had this license that was underpinning everything, and it's like you don't have to worry about how you're expressing stuff because this OGL is allowing you, even if you don't want to use it, is allowing you a common tongue for you guys to all communicate amongst each other. Whether you want to speak that tongue or not is up to you. And people like me love that language, so we like expressing stuff in that language. Now it's like, yeah, we're killing Spanish. I'm like, what? How do you kill off Spanish? Well, you gotta kill all the Spaniards, I guess. It's like, well, good luck with that. If you wanna, I was about to make an oppressed Asian peoples near Tibet comment, but that would potentially demonetize me because the Google thought police are real. But yes, there are real-world examples right now of people trying to eliminate languages from the world. And it's just such a mean thing to do. Like, how small do you have to be to not allow people to speak a certain way? But hey, that's American politics right now, ain't it? I don't want to. That was a jab. I really don't want to get into that conversation because, oh my God, it's so horrible. But there was a cool God, I can't remember who it was, but somebody had put out a really fun YouTube essay about the presence of fascism in an accepting society framed through Kubrick's movie Clockwork Orange, or the book Robert. God, I can't remember the name of the author of Clockwork Orange, but it talks about the rise of fascism and oppression as something that society asked for and is actively requesting more oppression from, as opposed to it being forced onto you through war. It's a very interesting psychological study, or sociological study, about where people go when they don't have any internal pressure to become better. Like, how does society turn when it's no longer actively pushing against hostile forces? How it eats itself, how it creates its own hostility to push its own growth, for better or for worse. And that's just amazing. Where are we at? 7:34. Okay, cool. I got another 20 minutes left, so maybe I can get around this island finally. But this was all spinning out of the observation that the internet is allowing the previous generation to stick around and to remain relevant, and because RPGs are so unique from so much other industry, in that as long as you can continue communicating and can do basic math, you can remain on the field competing, as it were, indefinitely. You don't have to. You're not 45 and your knees are shot, so you have to stop playing football. I've got 35 years of small scale unit tactical experience of using a 10-foot pole to look for traps and just looking at a map and saying, yeah, I'd put a trap there, there, and there. Let's check those spots. And sure as shit, I'm right, because dungeon design doesn't evolve as quickly as the trap springers that analyze them. Like, if you've got a guy that's been playing a dungeon rogue for 25 years and he's been springing traps for 25 years on maps, those maps aren't evolving to deal with the experience of that rogue, that player that's specialized in being a rogue in a dungeon. He's really good at picking out, here's a good place, here's a good place, here's a good place for ambushes. And this 2-year-old, this 2-year dungeon DM that's trying to build a challenging dungeon, and he's playing it against 50-year-olds, they can see all the tactical strong points. They have that SWAT SEAL Team 6 experience of going in and fighting ogres and kobolds for the past 20 years. They know where those little suckers can hide. So when they see a map and they start exploring the space, they know to check their corners. They've always got their 6 covered. They're laying out caltrops to lock down areas. They have attack dogs that they bring in specifically just to let off the leash, so it'll run off and go attack something that you can't see because they can smell it. Like, this is the kind of crap old school dungeoneers think about. So dungeons become less and less of a challenge to them. Well, lo and behold, dungeons are being de-emphasized in 5e now. It's being more about a social encounter expanding into exploration. Rogue Watson's comment about the Dragonlance campaign is how little dungeon there is in it, and that those dungeons are good ways to help ground low-level characters into a campaign, because dungeons are enclosed game spaces that allows the DM to control
the pipeline of challenges that a player faces by going down A, B, or C. I know you're going to have to choose one of those railroads. You get to choose which railroad you go down, but while you're going down this dungeon path, you are on a railroad, because to get to the next room, you have to go 15 feet in that direction. That's technically a railroad. And so opening up this more social guided tour through Solamnia, it's disengaging the characters from the dungeon adventure space, but it's also all the people that love Dragonlance in the first place have a severe history with dungeon spaces and crawling through them. So like it becomes an issue of, is my dungeon actually challenging you, or can we de-emphasize how dangerous this dungeon is and how it's going to trick you, and just weave it into the narrative of the storyline that we want to express in, say, Lost Mines of Phandelver campaign, which would not surprise me when that campaign setting is released, that there is a strong de-emphasis on dungeon delving. I will happily eat crow, and y'all can come back at me when that Phandelver campaign drops to see how much dungeon and how much underground is actually in the Mines of Phandelver campaign setting. I suspect it's going to take you out of Phandelver into cities where you can be dealing with nobility and dinner parties and arranging resources in a very low energy, low mechanics mining guild development sort of thing. Like, I don't know if that's what they're going to do, but we already know they want to create home bases, and that home base mechanic already exists in Acquisition Inc., which is Chris Perkins' campaign, his own homebrew campaign, where he has these ideas about very low dense rule systems for campaigns and community guilds and communities, which of course we've fleshed out with Adam into a really deep mechanic that allows for a lot of expressive a lot of game expression inside your game to build resources and create new plot options for your characters running guilds. If you look at the Acquisition Inc. book, you can see those ideas are present, but they're as thin as you would expect. They're as thin as Spelljammer is thin. So if you don't want mechanical depth in your guild concepts, then Acquisition Inc. is probably going to be sufficient for you. But like compared to Kingmaker, like Pathfinder's Kingmaker in comparison, it's not designed to be a 4X game simulator. It's just designed to add additional plot hooks for your characters to then go off and attack things again. And I don't think it's a missed opportunity. It's just a big commentary on where 5e or what will be one D&D development, like the design thoughts behind how they think the role-playing game is supposed to be engaged, and like what I guess the best way of putting it is like how far away from mechanics they're trying to take role-playing. And I think that journey away from game mechanics is going to be demonstrated with the development of 1D&D. Unifying everything behind the proficiency bonus modifier is a very simplified resource mechanic that has a very samey feel to it that 4E had a problem. 4E wanted to be 1D&D before they had the technology to create 1D&D. 4E was technically ahead of its times and suffered for it. So it had a lot of narrative depth to it, but its mechanics were so stale that it didn't inspire homebrew. And the GSL license that it had dissuaded homebrew as well. So it's like the less inspiring the game system is, the more restrictive they make the license to use it, which is honestly fine, because nobody really wants to develop for a stale, limiting system. 5e has almost the same depth of expression that 3E had. But 3E had ridiculous depth of design expression, because there were so many subsystems that you could build inside the basic character scaffolding and the prestige class system scaffolding. The spell the spell system had a lot of depth to it, and they were not shy about creating entire new games, like subsystems inside, like the factotum system, or the or skill trick system, or the Book of Nine Swords martial magic system, shadow magic systems, Incarnum, legacy weapons, savage species. These were all subsystems that exist inside of the 3E game space that allow you to use new mechanics to staple onto your existing 3E characters, which, when you combine them all together, makes for some ridiculously powerful optimization options, which would be its own, just like the Telflamar Shadow Pouncer character combines alternate racial types, prestige classes, Incarnum system, Book of Nine Swords, legacy weapons, and shadow magic all into the same character to build something that every time you use an action, bonus action, swift action, and movement, 4 different instances of you using a teleport effect to move, to take an action, to take a bonus action, to use a swift action. 4 different teleportation options that you build into your character. And the Telflamar Shadow Pouncer is a creature that can make 5 attacks every time they teleport. So you building that character over the course of, say, 18 levels, at the end of that you have a character that can make 20 attacks per round, doing 8d6 sneak attack damage on top of a full attack, with anywhere from a plus 25 to a plus 8 to attack, against creatures that have a 32 armor class. Like, that's what you can do with 3rd edition. That's late game development, where mechanics were the emphasis of your system as opposed to narration. And 5e has figured out that if they lean into narrative, they can lean away from mechanics, so they don't have to worry about what happens if we use True Name with Vestige with backgrounds. Like, what kind of an abomination would we build if we allow people to multi-class this stuff? Since we have to let people have multi-classing because they'll revolt if we don't, we now have to throttle back the options that you have to use that multi-classing with, and that's where we're at with 5e leaning into 1D&D. It's if you've been around those 30 years or 20 or 15 years, as long as you've lived through a few editions, you can see that path of design where Wizards is moving away from mechanical detail into narrative emphasis, and leading away from empowerment in epic campaigns into enjoying the narrative experience of what the story is leading you through. And I've talked about that God knows how many hours in previous streams across different playlists. So, and I don't peel any of these things out as separate sound bites, although I really should. But yeah, that's a big cultural change that people that have been around for a while can see is happening. And as long as I stay online, I can make comments about that and draw attention to it, which isn't necessarily in Wizards' best interest as they continue to develop this game. But we can see that development process over time. And all of us that came in as critters, or like us that came in during 5e, we are now experiencing the first taste of that as 1D&D develops and takes us from a more mechanically crunchy 5e, I mean laughably mechanically crunchy 5e, which is nothing compared to how convoluted 1st and 2nd edition were, into that 4e GSL game space of that sameness. 4e sameness was, it didn't matter what it didn't matter what what class you were playing. It all felt like the same. Ability check equals to hit or save versus effect. Like they all had that same sameness. Like attack, like fighter uses attack, like strength check equals 2 dice of damage, versus wizard rolls intelligence, does 2 dice of damage. It's identical except the wizard uses intelligence and the warrior uses strength. But otherwise the mechanics are the same. And what I think we're seeing in one D&D is all the characters are going to be expressed as proficiency bonus per day, proficiency bonus to plus ability modifier, to proficiency bonus worth pool of dice damage, for instance. Like that's the ultimate iteration of what one D&D is, which is the quintessential 6E, which is the new iteration away from all the classes are the same. It's the classes will be different, but everything you do in those classes and those characters is all built off of the PB. So it's PB with no J, I guess is the term I'm going to coin right now. It's just peanut butter. It doesn't even like the bread is the class, but everyone gets peanut butter. So there's nothing but peanut butter, and there's no added flavor from the mechanics. The jelly would be the sweetness of satisfying game design. These are just raw, not even creamy. It's creamy peanut butter sandwiches for everybody. That's all you get. And the class that you're playing is the kind of bread that you put it on. But it's still a creamy peanut butter sandwich. There's not even any crunch in it. See how I did that? I don't mind being wrong. It would be great if I am. Because me being wrong means we're going to have a more rich game environment and deeper mechanics than what I think 1D&D is doing. But them talking about trying to gamify online to make a simpler VTT where they can fold all this stuff into a very basic algorithm that's using a very basic PB mechanic to be able to cycle through all the dice for moving that goblin 15 feet and attacking you this round, because an AI is suggesting that's the most optimal action for that goblin to take this round. You know, in your solo Curse of Strahd campaign kit that you purchased for $30 on DMs on 1D&D, whatever that website's going to be. That is where they're attempting to go. And you can extrapolate that and play it at your kitchen table if you want. Here are the rules. So it'll be an online game first. By the way, here's the written rules that you can then build characters yourself and play at the kitchen table. We would encourage you to use our virtual tabletop for all your maps during your at-home game. Log in and have fun. I can see that being an effective strategy if they aren't douchebags about it. Unfortunately, you got douchebags running the company, so it's gonna feel douchey, sadly. So that's what we're competing against. That is, I believe, where we are at in the state of affairs right now. So it'll be really interesting to see how this all evolves in the next few years, and whether, like DMsGuild, whether we can continue to express things in 5e or not, or how much, like how much is 1D&D going to allow for people to even homebrew with it in the first place? Or is it going to be boring? I suspect it's going to be so boring that people aren't going to want to use it anyway, so they may as well have their own license because no one's going to want to use it. And if they move into that boring space, that boring design space that's so inexpensive to produce, they're kind of killing the motivation for people to want to engage with it anyway. So it's going to be natural that people are going to want to play with Kobold Press instead, like Black Flag or Orc or whatever it is that we got going. Well, Orc's just a license. It's the game system that we're looking for. It's what game system is going to continue carrying 5e out away from where 1D&D goes, because 1D&D will probably be disappointing, mechanically boring, because it's an even edition. 4e was boring, 6e will be boring. 4e had a smothering licensing agreement that nobody wanted to bother with. 6e is proposing the same. It took, 7 years for Wizards to realize that they've lost the lead in to Pathfinder in preferred game space. So they create the OGL to pull everybody back in, and now that everyone's here, they want to get rid of the OGL and then push everyone away again. Like, they're not going to get anybody back until 7e, and they're going to have to get rid of 1D&D. That brand name is going to be poisonous. Unless they build a game space that's going to invite people to come in and be able to design stuff, which is where everybody on the DMsGuild is really curious about. Where is this all going to end up? Because 1D&D people, the DMsGuild, is where their creative talent is keeping their IP alive. If they kill the DMsGuild, then we're all just going to go someplace else. We'll pick up Black Flag and we'll just keep on keeping on. There'll be new campaign settings, new adventures that people develop outside of Wizards IP, because Wizards is going to fence themselves off. It's like, hey, we have all this Ravenloft stuff. It's like, great, open it back up for us to use. No, we don't. No, okay, we'll see you after you retire. Because whoever the new... Here's the thing about corporations. Whenever they change out leadership completely changes the strategy of the company. Why? Because they have to justify their golden parachute. I've seen it happen in corporations over and over again. New management comes in, they shake up everything because they're the hot new shit, and they need to prove that they're hot new shit by bringing in new ideas. And the best way for them to create a new idea is to find the flaw in what the current, like the old guys that just quit or got fired, what were their ideas and where did it not work? Well, my new ideas are going to avoid whatever that is, good or bad. And we're going to go in a new way, which was very possibly 7E will end up reopening a new game. If OGL ends up not being good and closes down, then once these current idiots, once they get their golden parachute and leave, and thank God they will, because they don't care about D&D at all. Hopefully they'll get somebody who's actually passionate about gaming and have some experience in it, to have leadership that understands how Magic is fun, how D&D is fun, instead of leaving it in charge of people that don't think it's fun. God, isn't that just like people that don't like Scooby-Doo are making Velma. People that don't like The Witcher are making a Witcher TV show. People that don't like comic books are making Marvel TV shows. Like, when are you going to find people that love the content they're producing for, so that they can actually resonate with the people they're selling it to, that also love that comic book, that game, that show, that movie franchise? It's like, why don't you find talent that loves the Villanueva? You can tell that he loves Dune because of how well he's presenting the content. The new Dune movie was cool. And it did a lot of neat stuff, and the visuals and the way that the characters interacted. It's like, I'm on board with this version of Dune, but I also love the old '80s Dune. David Lynch likes Dune, and you can tell because the way that he created the movie is like, this is it's a very different movie, but both of those movies approach the characters different ways. And they both have a lot of really cool commentary on how the universe of Dune operates. They're both super cool, but completely different ways of telling the story. But you can tell they're both fans. And that's the big difference of having fans in charge of your IP that are professionals, that can operate inside of the game space or the medium that they were hired to operate inside of, to make a cool representation of this IP. Huge difference. It's so obvious you can see it. Ask yourself, when you see the new Indiana Jones movie, did the people that created that Indiana Jones film, do they love that pulp noir storytelling that Indiana Jones developed from, or do they not like it? And you'll be able to tell by the way they treat the content. Anyway, it's 7:57 here in Seattle. It's time for me to, I made some progress. We started here and we got our way all the way around over to here. There's too much bubbliness. Do you see that? There's a lot of bubbliness here that I'm creating as opposed to like jagged smokiness. And I was able to do this because these are going down pathways in a direction towards a larger pit. I'm concerned about, like, I think that blurbliness is here, but like I need to create more evil smoke effects, I think is what I'm missing here. So I think that's where I need to go with this from now on. And I was wondering, yesterday I was wondering what's going on with that. And I think I've locked down now that I don't have enough evil fingers or smoky fingers. Or, yeah, like the smokiness moving through here. It's too bubbly. So I need to create more thin, sharp, stabby lines moving through this space instead of having this like 60s bubble vibe that I got going on. I think that's where our flaw is at. Like you can start seeing it here, the 60 vibe bubbliness. I need to get rid of that and make it more jabby, more malicious. So, but I didn't know that going into this. I didn't know that's the language that we needed to express, but it's pretty easy to see that now, which means and luckily I saw it early on with these smaller pieces. Like that smokiness is present here. You've got that, this stuff feels more insidious than what we have going on down here. This feels more maybe limbo, chaos, bubbly soup, as opposed to malicious poison. So now we have a better understanding of the visual language we're trying to express with, which means I'm going to have to come back through and clean this up to be more of that malicious, smoky vibe instead of spilled paint. So I'm happy to have discovered that early on. We can start seeing that bubbliness invading this space here, but we can see that smoky ribbon feeling here. So it's present, but we started to lose it in this big bubbly effect. So we need to get more, yeah. So we're gonna have to backtrack a little bit, but it's great that we figured it out. Again, that's why we did these small things, to be able to see to see where it's evolving to, so we can control and shape that to remain common with the rest of the map. So this has been a huge victory today. It's going to require a couple more hours of me backtracking and fixing, but overall it's a huge victory for the overall piece of it in the language that we're expressing. So that's it for the day. I won't be on this evening. I'll be back on in 22 hours. We'll probably continue. Well, we might continue this map, but we'll continue this map tomorrow and on Thursday morning, and then Thursday night we'll come back and we'll do Spelljammer ship tokens Thursday night. So like, subscribe. We updated Martial Powers yesterday, so go check that out. We did Spelljammer tokens last night. Check that out. Drop a comment if you want. Find me on Twitter. I always post that I'm live on Twitter, and if you know where I'm on Discord, drop me a line and say hi. And I'll see you guys on the other side. Good day.